Hi, I'm Ruban Selvanayagam from Property Solvers. Over the last decade or so, office to residential conversion became one of the most talked about strategies in property investment circles. And for good reason. On paper, the model made a lot of sense. You could acquire underperforming office buildings at commercial values, sometimes well below half the residential price per square foot in the same postcode, and the margin was baked in from day one. Between 2015 and 2021 in particular, that approach delivered strong returns for a number of savvy investors. But in 2026, something has shifted and it runs deeper than interest rates or rising build costs. The underlying feasibility of these projects is changing, and not in a way that's likely to reverse. In this video, I want to explain why, what's changed from both a regulatory and a built environment standpoint, and importantly, where the genuine opportunities still exist. Let's dive in. For a long time, two things made the numbers stack on office conversions. The first was relatively cheap debt, which gave projects room to absorb delays and inefficiencies, while still hitting acceptable returns. The second was a favourable planning framework, particularly permitted development rights or PDRs, which allowed change of use from office to residential without going through full planning permission. Together, those two factors created a real window of opportunity. Investors could move quickly, keep costs reasonably controlled, and rely on strong residential demand to support exit assumptions. However, that model depended on conditions that no longer exist today in the same form. With borrowing costs higher and lending criteria tighter, the margin for error on these projects has reduced significantly. Cheap debt used to mark inefficiencies, delays and cost overruns could be absorbed within the overall profitability of the scheme, and that buffer has largely gone. But here's the thing, finance alone isn't what's killing these deals. There are more fundamental challenges happening on the building safety and regulatory side, and that's what investors aren't always factoring in early enough. The Building Safety Act passed in April 2022, a direct response to Grenfell, 5 years in the making. Its focus was straightforward: make residential buildings safer, with fire risk and evacuation at the centre of everything. The Act didn't land all at once. Its provisions came into force in stages through 2022 and 2023. By the time the full weight of it settled on the development industry, the implications for office to residential conversions were hard to ignore. And for anyone underwriting office to residential conversions, the requirement that changed everything was this: residential buildings above certain heights would now be expected to have multiple staircases. For many existing office buildings, that's a serious problem. A large proportion of older office stock was designed around a single central core. One staircase, lifts, surface risers, which is efficient for commercial use but can be non-compliant for residential. Adding a second staircase isn't a minor design tweak. It often means losing usable floor space, altering structural elements, and fundamentally reconfiguring the building, sometimes to the point where the scheme simply doesn't stack anymore. This is where the nature of risk changes in an important way. You move away from planning risk, which is reasonably manageable, into physical and structural constraints, which are not. Floor plate depth, natural light access, the positioning of escape routes, these are all determined by the building's geometry, not by what's written in a planning document. If the building's layout can't support compliant residential design, no amount of negotiation with the local authority will fix that. It's a constraint baked into the bricks. The building safety regulator now plays a much more active role in reviewing and approving schemes too. That adds scrutiny, reduces flexibility, and can extend timelines significantly. Most office to residential projects are funded on short-term finance, bridging loans and development finance, for example. That makes time one of the most expensive variables in the deal. Every month of delay is a month of interest accruing, holding costs mounting, and projected margins eroding. If a redesign is required mid-project, build costs rise. If the scheme becomes unviable, your exit is compromised, and at that point the finance stops being the tool and becomes the problem. This is why the question can't simply be, can this building be converted? The more important question is whether that conversion holds up when things don't go to plan. We're also seeing this play out at the other end of the market. Here at Property Solvers, we're regularly contacted by people trying to sell flats in exactly these kinds of converted buildings. Many of these units were sold at what were arguably artificially inflated prices. Buyers paid a new build premium on top of values that had already been inflated by Help to Buy. A government scheme that, whatever its intentions, pumped demand into a market without doing anything about supply. Now those same buyers are trying to sell into a market that's sobered up considerably. The premium they paid on the way in isn't being reflected in what buyers are willing to pay in today's market. It's a useful reminder that exit assumptions built into conversion projects don't exist in isolation. They're shaped by the broader market conditions at the point of sale, and those conditions can shift considerably over a 5 to 7 year hold period. However, none of this means office to residential conversion is impossible. It means it's becoming more selective. And that narrowing of the field actually creates opportunity for investors who know what to look for and crucially have a deep understanding of building geometry, fire safety compliance, and natural light requirements. That means also getting under the skin of floor plate depth, structural load-bearing walls, ventilation constraints, and the position of the existing service cores before a penny is even committed. It's also worth being honest about something that doesn't get said enough. In some cases, particularly where structural constraints are significant, it can make more financial sense to demolish and rebuild from scratch rather than convert. It's a harder conversation to have, but the numbers sometimes point there, and experienced investors need to at least run that scenario. The buildings that tend to remain viable as conversions are those where the building's bones are already aligned with residential use. A good example is large Victorian or Edwardian buildings that shifted into commercial use over the decades, but were originally built as residential or mixed-use properties. The floor plates tend to be narrower, natural light is better distributed, and the structural layout is far more sympathetic to what modern residential compliance requires. These buildings often carry genuine character that adds end value too, and they tend to be better conversion candidates than purpose-built office blocks built from the 1950s and 60s onwards. Another thing worth flagging is that properties in commercial areas, or those with a mixed-use element, sit in a different lending category entirely. The pool of lenders at the moment willing to finance these assets is significantly smaller than in the standard residential or buy-to-let market, and the criteria they apply is considerably more stringent. It's not a deal breaker for the right deal, but it's absolutely not something to discover halfway through a project. The key, as always, is identifying the right assets early, before the market prices in the conversion premium. Office to residential conversion isn't disappearing, but it's becoming more complex, more constrained, and far more dependent on the physical reality of the specific building in front of you. General feasibility assumptions from previous cycles won't cut it anymore. The deeper your due diligence and the earlier you assess structural and safety compliance, the better placed you are to avoid deals that look viable on the spreadsheet, but unravel on site. Because in property, the risk isn't always where it first appears, and increasingly what looks like a planning opportunity is actually an exit problem waiting to happen. So just before I wrap up, if you're a commercial property owner and today's video has raised some questions about where your asset sits in all of this, we're always happy to have that conversation. No obligation, of course, just an honest discussion about your options. I'll add the link to our commercial property page in the description. A big thanks for watching to the end, and if you like this content, please like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.